few top-line points. I think this is important. If you go back to when ISIS really arrived on the international scene back in 2014, we had 40,000 foreign fighters from 110 countries around the world pouring into Syria and Iraq. They controlled what was effectively a quasi-state. They were able to mass and maneuver force all around Iraq and Syria, taking entire cities, controlling millions of people under their domain. Since that time, they have lost about 70,000 square kilometers of territory in Iraq and Syria. About 78% of the territory they used to hold in Iraq they can no longer operate in, and about 58% of the territory they used to hold in Syria they can no longer operate in. Importantly, of all that territory that they have lost, they have not regained. When our coalition supports elements on the ground to retake territory from ISIS, they have never been able to reclaim that territory. So this is not a campaign in which you go in, you clear, you can't hold, and they come back. They have never been able to retake any of this ground, and we're going to make sure that that continues. Importantly, not just territory, but even more important, people. Almost 5 million people who had been living under ISIS are no longer living under ISIS. They've been liberated by coalition-enabled operations on the ground. Also critically important, a few years ago, you saw migrants and refugees pouring out of this part of the world. We have now reversed that flow. In Iraq alone, about 2 million people have returned to their homes in areas that have been cleared from ISIS. These are areas used to be under the control of this terrorist group. Now you have people actually returning to their homes, 2 million people. That is almost unprecedented in a conflict like this in terms of getting returnees back, and it's due to a lot of the work that the Secretary mentioned here at the podium the other day about our stabilization and humanitarian effort that goes in parallel with any military campaign. The force we're working with, the Iraqi security forces, we have trained as a coalition 100,000 members of the Iraqi security forces in total. They have never lost a battle. This is an Iraqi security force that had almost collapsed. Those forces, those units that we have trained as a coalition have never lost a battle. In Syria, when it comes to the campaign against ISIS, we are working primarily with the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's a force of now about 50,000. It's about half Arab, half Kurd. They also have never lost a battle. Not only have they never lost a battle, the training courses, and I've been to Syria about 6 times now, 3 times over the past 6 months, our training courses on the ground in Syria are full. As we move into areas, particularly among the Arab, Sunni Arab population, our training classes are full because these people want to get back to their homes and kick ISIS out of their areas. So our training classes are full. They've never lost a battle. Also very importantly, elements of what we call the vetted Syrian opposition, particularly in part of Syria, which I'll point to on the map, supported by the Turkish forces, an area known as the Euphrates Shield Zone, also very effectively cleared ISIS out of key terrain that they had held. Here's what's really important. Over the last 6 months, we have dramatically accelerated this campaign, and you heard about some of this from Secretary Tillerson. Nearly 30% of all the territory that has been retaken from ISIS, about 20,000 square kilometers, has actually happened in the last 6 months. As you know, the campaign against Mosul is now finished, and in Raqqa, which I'll talk to in more detail, about 45% of Raqqa is now cleared. This is due to some key changes that were put in place very early on, 3 changes, initiatives from President Trump, and I'll just highlight 4 of them. Number 1, and very importantly, this makes a tremendous difference on the ground, the delegation of tactical authority from the White House, from Washington, down through the chain of command to our commanders on the ground. That has made a fairly tremendous difference in our ability to actually seize opportunities from ISIS, and I'll talk about one of those in some detail. Second, you've heard Secretary Mattis talk about it's a campaign of annihilation. We make sure that before we do a military operation, we actually surround the enemy so that foreign fighters in particular cannot escape. Every foreign fighter that made its way into Syria and Iraq, we want to make sure that they can never make their way out of Syria and Iraq. Third, from day one, we looked at how we can increase our burden sharing from the coalition, and that is why, as the Secretary mentioned when he was here earlier this week, one of his first initiatives was to call on all members of our coalition, and it's now 73 members of our coalition, 69 countries, 4 international organizations, one of the largest coalitions in history. And he had all of those members here in March to talk about this next accelerated phase of the campaign. And we raised in that session alone about $2 billion, which really came in critical needs, particularly for the post-Mosul phase and the humanitarian aspect of taking care of the IDPs from Mosul. Finally, the whole of government effort to make sure that we're working as a government hand in glove with our colleagues in Treasury, the Department of Defense, here at the State Department and within the NSC to make sure that we're taking advantage of opportunities, working not just in Iraq and Syria, but also to sever the financial connections and propaganda networks that continue to fuel terrorist groups like this.